Under the sodium lights still casting the last warmth of the day, Ellie Carter vanished from the parking lot of the Rivera Center building in Nashville, the city of 715,000 people. The June night poured down with a layer of muggy air mixed with the smell of hot asphalt, making every movement in the quiet office area even quieter than usual. At 9:12 p.m., a witness standing at the bus stop waved hello when they saw Ellie, the 21-year-old inspection technician, hugging her document briefcase as she walked through the narrow corridor, connecting the two rows of stator maintenance lights. She was carrying the report that her colleague said could get a few people fired. The report that Ellie planned to submit the next morning. The witness watched until Ellie's figure blended into the darkness at the end of the parking lot, and her black briefcase was the last sign before everything sank into the silence that Nashville would never forget. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Nashville in the late afternoon and early evening carried a layered atmosphere. Long strips of streetlight glow stretched across the road's surface, still holding the moisture from an earlier brief rain, and the sparsely populated office buildings gradually sank into the pale gray that is so characteristic of the city in the last days of summer. A breeze from the nearby park moved through, gently shaking the tree canopies and mixing their rustle with the distant sound of traffic, making the whole area feel both larger and emptier than normal. The parking lot serving the office complex, already lightly used at this hour, became even quieter once the clock passed the point when most employees had already left. The air grew cooler, the high-pressure lights cast uneven pools of brightness, and each dark gap between two light poles felt like a separate pocket of space. Ellie Carter, 21 years old, stepped out through the large glass doors of her workplace building, left hand holding the black document briefcase she always carried on weekdays, right hand lightly tugging her thin jacket as the wind slipped through the long corridor leading to the parking area. Her walk was faster than usual, not rushed, but clearly focused, as though she wanted to leave the premises as quickly as possible after a day filled with many inspection items. The route she took had few lights and was shadowed by the buildings, so the illumination was only enough to see a few steps ahead clearly. Her young appearance stood out against the thick stillness of the surroundings, creating a contrast between her youth and the gradually darkening scene. At the point where the walkway met the turn toward the parking rows, a witness said they saw Ellie pause for a few seconds. The man standing just at the edge of a light pole's glow, taller than her, wearing a dark coat and a hat that covered most of his face. The light coming from behind made identification difficult. Only the general shape and the movement of his hand were visible as he pointed in some direction. The exchange was brief, too short to hear the words, but Ellie's body language showed discomfort. Her shoulders tensed slightly, as though trying to maintain distance, while still keeping the necessary politeness. As Ellie continued down the ramp into the parking area, a metallic sound rang out from somewhere behind her. The witness instinctively turned toward it. It sounded like something hard hitting the concrete or a car door being closed with extra force. In the moment that person looked toward the noise, the spot where Ellie had just been standing was empty, lit only by the weak streetlight. There was no longer any sign of her or the man. The remaining vehicles in the lot sat silent, with no movement standing out to draw attention. By the time it was fully dark, Ellie still hadn't contacted anyone. Her family began calling her personal number but got no signal. They tried reaching her colleagues, but no one knew exactly when she had left the building. In the following hours, worry steadily grew as every attempt to reach her failed. Ellie had never skipped her fixed routines, and not checking in at home was completely out of character. After double-checking every possibility and finding no indication that Ellie had changed her plans, the family realized something was clearly wrong and contacted Nashville police to report her missing. When the police received the call reporting Ellie missing, the information was immediately recorded, and the on-duty team began initial deployment by determining the last time she was seen at the office complex, requesting family members to provide all verifiable data from her final day. A patrol unit was dispatched to the area around the building where Ellie had left, approaching the outdoor corridor space, the exit to the parking lot, and the entire possible route she might have taken. Officers conducted a detailed sweep of every point where light was obstructed, noting lighting levels, terrain structure, wind direction, ground humidity, and every factor that could affect trace evidence. Every detail described by witnesses about the location where the unidentified man stood was marked with specific coordinates, forming a defined radius that needed clarification. From the intersection of the walkway and the ramp leading down to the parking lot where the metallic sound was heard, police shone lights into stone gaps, curb edges, drainage channels, checking to see if anything had been left behind, even though everything appeared no different from a normal evening in the office area. Meanwhile, the investigative team interviewed the witness who had seen Ellie stop to talk. This person described the man as taller than Ellie, wearing a dark jacket, a hat, standing at an angle with his head slightly bowed, hands moving as if giving directions or arguing about something. The witness also described a low voice, drowned out by traffic noise from the road, so the content couldn't be clearly heard. But the overall feeling was that the exchange was not friendly. Police accurately recorded the time the witness passed by, estimated their observation distance, the brightness level at that moment, and the direction Ellie moved after the conversation. To narrow down the group of people possibly involved, police compiled a list of individuals who had direct or indirect contact with Ellie within 48 hours before she disappeared. The list included co-workers at the environmental office, staff from construction sites and businesses currently under inspection, personnel responsible for delivering documents, individuals who had joint meetings with her in the 2 most recent days, and even those with brief interactions that could potentially affect her schedule. Each name on the list was categorized by level of relevance, timing of interaction, and potential to create conflicts of interest. Through verification at Ellie's workplace, police confirmed she had left the building with a briefcase containing a technical inspection report she was working on. The management department at her workplace provided information that this report was of high importance because it included safety assessments related to the operations of a project with numerous regulatory violations. The fact that Ellie took the briefcase out at the end of the day was recorded as not unusual, but the timing of her departure raised questions because, according to work records, the report was still being updated and finalized. During verification, police also investigated who would be directly or indirectly affected if the inspection report were completed and submitted to higher authorities. These individuals were flagged on the watch list, especially anyone who had previously clashed with Ellie regarding inspection findings. Leaving no possibility unchecked, police reviewed the building's access logs, cross-referencing them with Ellie leaving through the main gate and entering the parking area. Parameters captured from nearby cameras, though blurry, were still analyzed to confirm the number of people present in the area during the time Ellie was last seen. At the same time, another group of officers swept all exit routes from the complex to look for signs of an escape path that a man might have used if he wanted to leave the area quickly. From the initial data collected, police focused on the area where the witness heard the metallic sound, as this sound was assessed as likely related to a mechanical action rather than random environmental noise. Every point in the area was illuminated, and the surface condition recorded to evaluate the possibility of an object falling or being struck. In addition, the investigative team continued interviewing people who were at the building or leaving the area around the same time, gathering more accounts to build a more accurate picture of when Ellie passed through. Once data from witnesses and the 48-hour contact list was obtained, police began prioritizing layers based on 3 factors: ability to access Ellie in the area where she disappeared, degree of conflict or clash of interest, and connection to the inspection documents in her briefcase. They flagged individuals with direct ties to the items covered in the report Ellie was finalizing for closer examination. In each case, investigators requested detailed information about work schedules, each person's location at the end of the afternoon, and any observed changes in behavior noted by colleagues. All collected information was entered into the police department's internal tracking system for continued cross-checking. As the search teams expanded their radius by many miles from the location where Ellie was last seen, a patrol unit discovered her car in an area that was completely inconsistent with her daily routines. The spot where the car was parked was a low-traffic stretch of road, far from the main routes Ellie normally used and not connected to her workplace, home, or any familiar places she frequented. The area was deserted, with no nearby residences. Scattered road signs indicated it was a route used by local trucks but rarely saw personal vehicles parked there for hours. The car sat right against the shoulder, its front end angled slightly to one side, as though it had been deliberately steered into that position and stopped intentionally rather than abandoned at random. When officers approached, the door locks were intact, showing no signs of being pried, picked, or smashed. This immediately ruled out any overt or sloppy car theft. Typical vehicle thefts usually leave visible tampering marks on the lock, doors, or windows, but Ellie's car displayed none of those indicators. The doors were fully closed and remained in the same condition as when the last driver left them. Upon closer inspection through the windows, officers noticed several items were not in the places her family described as normal. Some of Ellie's documents were shifted onto the passenger seat. Her purse was unzipped just enough to reveal its contents had been disturbed. The water bottle rested halfway on the floor in an odd position, and a small object lay under the seat in a spot where Ellie never kept anything. There were no broken glass fragments, no signs of violent disorder, but the overall impression was that the car's interior did not reflect a normal trip. The familiar items being out of place were enough to raise suspicion that someone else had been inside the vehicle or had taken control of it sometime after Ellie left the office building. Although no clear signs of a struggle, such as bruises, blood, or physical traces of a fight were found, the arrangement of objects created the strong impression that the car had been rearranged or driven by someone else according to their own intent. The investigative team examined the car's exterior for any signs of collision or scraping, but the body showed no fresh damage. However, the thin layer of dust on the windshield had a small, fairly clean streak wiped across it, as though someone had run a hand or an object over it. Officers photographed everything for documentation and recorded every detail in preparation for forensic analysis. The fact that the car was found clean, undamaged, and properly locked, yet parked in a location completely outside all of Ellie's known routes, made the vehicle a central focus for uncovering evidence. Police immediately secured the scene, using crime scene tape to cordon off the area around the car to prevent any interference with potential evidence. Forensic technicians were called in to collect fingerprints, fiber samples, dust, and any microscopic traces that might be present on the door surfaces, steering wheel, gear shift, or seats. Blue light scanning equipment was brought in to check for traces invisible to the naked eye. At that point, the car was treated as a primary piece of evidence and handled according to strict protocols to preserve any remaining traces. All doors, the trunk, and the hood were sealed in accordance with Nashville Police Department evidence collection standards. Several questions were noted in the on-scene report concerning the car being parked neatly with no damage, combined with the mild level of disturbance to the contents inside. The overall impression was that the last person to drive it had enough time to position the vehicle exactly where they wanted, close the doors carefully, and leave the area without drawing attention. This behavior did not match any pattern of carjacking or opportunistic, unauthorized use that police had previously encountered. There was no reasonable explanation for Ellie to have driven the car to this location herself, and there were no signs that she had left the vehicle voluntarily. These details turned the car into a pivotal element of the entire investigation, as it represented the clearest trace of the final movement connected to Ellie's disappearance. The vehicle did not only reflect her last known presence, it also held yet-to-be-decoded clues about the involvement of another person in the short time after she left the office complex. Every detail inside the car and in the surrounding area was documented in the report to support forensic analysis aimed at clarifying the car's role in the circumstances that led to Ellie's disappearance. When the vehicle was brought to the police department's impound lot and sealed according to evidence protocol, the forensics team began opening the car under strict controlled conditions to identify every detail that might show signs of abnormality. The briefcase that Ellie had been carrying was found on the passenger seat, but upon opening it, investigators noticed that a portion of the documents was missing. The missing pages were precisely those containing items related to technical violations at a construction project under review, including notes on risk levels, non-compliant items, and recommendations that could have major impact on the individuals responsible for that project. All remaining documents were displaced, not in the order Ellie typically arranged them when taking them out of the office. The absence of those documents made the contents lose coherence. And this was inconsistent with Ellie's working style, because she always kept files complete when moving between inspection sites. Investigators recorded the position of each sheet of paper, fold angles, creases, determining whether there were signs of pages being pulled out by force or torn away, even though the briefcase cover showed no tearing or major deformation. While continuing to examine the vehicle interior, a foreign object was discovered under the rear seat floor. A thin gray glove made of synthetic fiber, not the type Ellie used. The family confirmed she did not own or carry gloves of this kind. A small dark-colored fabric fragment was also found caught in the gap between the seat and the armrest. Small in size, possibly a torn piece from someone's clothing. These items were immediately collected, placed into numbered evidence bags, and sent to the analysis lab to record their physical properties. In addition, investigators applied specialized lighting to the steering wheel, gear shift, and interior door handles to search for fingerprints. Some prints appeared, but most were too faint to identify because humidity inside the vehicle had degraded their distinguishing characteristics. Forensic technology at that time was not advanced enough to recover low-level fingerprints, so the result only noted that at least one person other than Ellie had touched certain surfaces inside the car. When closely examining the driver's seat position and mirror adjustment angle, police realized they did not match Ellie's height or driving habits. She usually positioned the seat close to the steering wheel, whereas the seat at the time of inspection was pushed much farther back, as if adjusted for someone of larger build. Shoe impressions on the floor mat did not match the type of shoes Ellie wore on her last day, and the mat showed no signs of heavy dragging or crisscross stomping marks that typically appear when someone tries to resist. The vehicle had no scratches or signs of impact damage. The doors showed no evidence of being kicked or forcefully pulled, giving the impression that whatever activity took place inside left no clear signs of conflict. Nevertheless, the arrangement of items in the car, the seat position, contact marks on the handles, and the slight disturbance in the briefcase still strongly indicated that Ellie was likely not the last person to control the vehicle. As investigators documented all these elements, they observed that the car appeared to have been driven to the discovery location by someone's deliberate choice and left in relatively orderly condition. Evidence items from the vehicle were sealed by category: the category of missing documents, the category of dust-adhered traces, the category of foreign objects including the glove and fabric fragment, the category of faint fingerprints, and the category of photographs recording the entire interior layout. All were transferred to the evidence storage facility, where items were kept according to the standards of the 1990s. Each item was classified and placed in preservation boxes. However, forensic technology of that period only allowed analysis of basic details and could not recover faint fingerprints, could not extract DNA from fabric fibers with high accuracy, and certainly could not analyze ultrafine dust particles to trace origins. As a result, some evidence could only be recorded and not deeply exploited. The lack of advanced technology limited the ability to determine who had touched the vehicle interior, who left the glove, and why certain documents were removed from the briefcase. Police discussed and recorded an initial hypothesis in the working log that the vehicle had most likely been driven by someone else after Ellie left the office building. The car was parked neatly, the doors carefully locked, and showed no damage. This was not typical behavior for disorganized car thefts or individuals using a vehicle to flee. The person controlling the car appeared to have taken time to place it in a chosen position, roughly tidy the interior, and leave the scene in a direction not easily detected. One member of the investigative team even added a note that the disappearance of part of the documents, the presence of foreign objects, and the rearrangement of items reinforced the suspicion that the vehicle was no longer under Ellie's control at the time it was placed at the discovery location. In official records, the vehicle was considered the most important piece of evidence up to that point, because it was the place containing the first abnormal signs directly related to Ellie's movements after leaving the office complex, and served as the link between her last known appearance and an environment she had never been to before. The review of Ellie's professional records showed that she was in charge of inspecting 3 companies that fell into the group at high risk of receiving heavy fines due to environmental regulation violations. Each company had critical items related to waste management, emission control, and compliance with safety standards during construction. The preliminary reports Ellie had gathered revealed numerous errors, ranging from failure to properly document procedures, overlooking mandatory monitoring requirements, to signs of data manipulation to avoid in-depth inspections. If the reports were submitted in full, several key personnel in these companies would face accountability for directly signing off on substandard items. Some individuals could even lose their professional certifications, while also risking long-term suspension of company operations. Ellie's work file indicated that she had been assigned to conduct an overall assessment and compile a list of violations that could lead to very substantial financial penalties. And this was why the reports she was carrying became highly valuable documents in determining legal responsibility for the involved parties. The investigative agency compiled a detailed list of individuals who had been cited by Ellie for technical violations during inspections. This list spanned from machine operators, project managers, and site supervisors to subcontractors responsible for supplying materials. Each person was listed along with the date of the citation, the severity of the violation, and their reaction when notified. Some showed normal cooperation, but others displayed displeasure when required to make corrections or halt work items. One manager from one of the three companies reacted strongly, claiming that Ellie's inspection steps were obstructing project progress and creating additional costs. Another worker was noted to have argued with Ellie because she demanded a temporary halt to operations so she could recheck the drainage system he was responsible for. These details were recorded by police because they could influence the potential formation of motive to cause harm when professional interests were threatened. In addition, the investigative agency reviewed the materials Ellie had collected across these three projects to determine the degree of impact each report would have on the inspected parties. In the first project, violations related to the use of substandard materials could hold the chief engineer accountable. In the second project, failure to maintain proper site logs could affect the contract signing authority of a management group. In the third project, certain emission data had been incorrectly adjusted compared to independent test results, and if exposed, this could lead to extremely severe penalties. Therefore, Ellie's reports did not merely record errors but also had the potential to alter the legal status of multiple individuals. While examining Ellie's professional relationships, police identified several workers and managers who had direct conflicts with her. One technician had been fined after Ellie cited him for using a measuring device with incorrect calibration. A site supervisor was required to redo reports multiple times, causing delays that led to reprimands from his superiors. A project manager was found to have deliberately ignored environmental regulations to cut operational costs. All of these individuals had reasons to not want Ellie's report to be finalized and submitted to the overseeing authority. The tension between Ellie and these people may not have escalated into major confrontations, but it was sufficient for police to note that the level of opposition over interests had gone beyond ordinary workplace disagreements. When piecing the data together, the investigative agency recognized a potential motive stemming from the desire to prevent Ellie from completing the report, to delay its submission, or to pressure her into altering its contents to downplay the severity of the violations. The fact that documents were missing from Ellie's briefcase further highlighted the possibility that someone had accessed her work in an unlawful manner. Several people on the list stood to suffer major losses if the complete report was submitted on schedule. This transformed workplace conflicts from mere isolated disagreements into a weighty factor in analyzing the causes behind Ellie's disappearance. Investigators raised the question of whether Ellie carrying important documents out of the office in the evening made certain individuals feel threatened, especially if they believed the report had reached a finalized stage and could no longer be changed. Police recorded that all the violating elements in the three projects shared a common point. They were directly evaluated by Ellie. This created a clear link between legal accountability and her presence at each location. The investigative agency incorporated all this information into their report to clarify that Ellie's professional relationships were far from simple. Every individual who faced the risk of disciplinary action due to inspection results became a factor that needed to be examined when determining causes related to Ellie's disappearance. As investigators assessed priorities for investigative directions, they identified Ellie's workplace conflicts as one of the central elements, because they directly tied to the missing documents and the level of damage certain individuals could face if the full report was submitted according to procedure. When the investigative agency compiled all data related to Ellie's work and professional relationships, they proceeded to classify the individuals who could potentially be involved into 3 clear groups to facilitate information gathering, behavior assessment, and risk level determination. The first group was construction site personnel, including those who worked directly at the inspection sites Ellie was responsible for, those present during on-site surveys, and those immediately affected by recorded violations. The second group was business management, including project supervisors, chief engineers, and individuals with authority to sign legally responsible documents. The third group consisted of technicians who had been directly cited for errors by Ellie, those who would face the heaviest consequences if the inspection report was finalized and forwarded to higher management. Dividing them into these 3 groups allowed the investigative agency to identify who had possible access to Ellie, who had strong motives, and who showed particular reactions to the findings she recorded. Among the individuals who stood out from the initial filtered list, James Rudd drew the most attention. Rudd was an experienced technician who had previously argued with Ellie at a construction site during an equipment inspection. Colleagues described that argument as not prolonged but reflective of Rudd's dissatisfaction when Ellie demanded the process be halted to recheck the measurement system. Rudd appeared to be someone who became irritated when evaluated or required to correct deficiencies, and his record showed he had encountered similar issues with other inspectors multiple times. This direct conflict between the two made Rudd a highlighted name on the list of people potential. Ellie's clear documentation of Rudd's technical violations in the file put him at risk of suspension or demotion, and this information was recorded to analyze how significantly such consequences might influence behavior. Besides Rudd, another suspect from the business management group attracted attention due to financial motives. This individual headed the department responsible for the items Ellie had cited for errors, and according to internal reports, if all the violation information was confirmed, his company would face a high fine and the ongoing project could be suspended. This person was also found to have been involved in several non-transparent cost adjustment decisions. Those actions were not sufficient to constitute a crime at that time. But when combined with Ellie's discovery of the violations, the level of disadvantage he would face became substantial. Some of his colleagues described him as showing signs of anxiety upon learning that Ellie was finalizing the report and had asked the technical department to review all records before the report was submitted. During the examination of the parking lot area and the walkway where Ellie was last seen, police collected a fairly clear shoe print. When compared with the shoe sizes of the suspects, they found that 2 people on the list had sizes matching the shoe print at the scene. Although shoe size is not evidence to confirm identity, this coincidence still caused those 2 individuals to be placed in the group requiring closer monitoring. Police recorded the type of shoe, sole wear pattern, and distinctive rubber tread marks left on the surface, preserving that data for comparison with equipment or personal belongings of the suspects. When analyzing his behavior during work hours, one suspect from the technician group was flagged for a tendency to conceal mistakes. Internal company records noted that this person had previously attempted to adjust data to match desired results and had been reprimanded for submitting false reports about a piece of equipment that did not meet standards. Some colleagues admitted that he had a habit of repairing or altering information to avoid reprimands. This drew the attention of the investigative agency because a pattern of concealing workplace violations could lead to a strong reaction when facing the risk of job loss, especially since Ellie was the one who directly recorded weaknesses in the technical processes he was responsible for. Furthermore, this individual had been present at one of the construction sites Ellie inspected during a time close to the day she disappeared, making the possibility of access to her particularly noteworthy. When all the information was placed side by side, the investigative agency began narrowing the suspect list to focus on those who shared 3 main characteristics: ability to access Ellie, sufficiently strong motive to influence behavior, and their appearance in the inspection categories Ellie was handling. The initial list was quite long, But after cross-referencing work records, schedules, and the degree of impact of each report, only a small group remained who required close supervision. Within this group, individuals who had direct arguments with Ellie, those threatened with loss of certification, those with significant financial interests, and those exhibiting unusual behavior at the scene were all placed within the scope of deeper scrutiny. Narrowing the suspect list allowed the investigative force to concentrate resources on those with the most noteworthy connections to the changes in Ellie's work, while also opening the possibility for more detailed analysis of their behavior and traces during the period related to her disappearance. During the investigative agency's analysis of the narrowed suspect list, James Rudd's file emerged as a case warranting close scrutiny due to the degree of involvement with Ellie's work and the events surrounding the inspection process. Rudd had been formally cited by Ellie after she discovered a measuring device at the site that did not meet technical standards and posed a risk of serious inaccuracies. This citation put Rudd in a difficult position. As per regulations, the responsible technician could be suspended pending a review of professional competency if additional violations occurred in a short time. This left Rudd under significant stress, especially since he had previously received several warnings about issues related to measuring equipment. Rudd's colleagues stated that after that inspection, he displayed irritation and dissatisfaction with the way Ellie documented and required the equipment to be stopped for rechecking. A co-worker on the same shift described that Rudd had a tendency to react strongly whenever his competency was evaluated or he was asked to redo work, and that Rudd had once loudly argued with Ellie when she requested additional evidence of inaccuracies in the system. These behaviors were noted in the company's personnel file, and police viewed them as factors requiring further investigation. When checking Rudd's shift logs for the day Ellie disappeared, the investigative agency found several irregularities. The shift that Rudd reported had entry and exit times that did not match the handwritten records from the site management department. Rudd's site timesheet recorded that he left the location 20 minutes earlier than the time he stated in the interview. There were even signs that one line had been altered with uneven handwriting, prompting police to compare it with previous workdays to check for differences in penmanship. Additionally, those working at the same time could not confirm seeing Rudd at the location he claimed during the intershift period. Another worker stated that he saw Rudd standing near the site parking area instead of his workstation, making Rudd's timeline difficult to verify. Police recorded all this information to assess the accuracy of Rudd's statement. In addition to checking the timeline, the investigative agency gathered descriptions of Rudd's behavior from colleagues who had worked with him. Some said that Rudd often reacted strongly when asked to explain technical errors. Others noted that he had once lost his temper in a meeting when required to repeat the inspection process to prove the equipment's accuracy. One supervisor even recorded that Rudd sometimes tried to ignore correction requests from inspectors, maintaining an uncooperative attitude and lacking restraint when receiving feedback. These reports reflected a pattern of behavior that could lead to negative reactions when facing potential legal consequences from the violations Ellie documented. A key detail that kept Rudd under consideration was that he had driven a truck of the same make and model year as the vehicle from which the unanalyzed plastic fragment in the evidence file was determined to originate. This vehicle line was commonly used at construction sites, but when cross-referenced with ownership and usage lists for the days near Ellie's disappearance, Rudd was among the few individuals with access to a matching type. This detail was not sufficient to conclude anything, but it remained noteworthy when considering the overall factors related to work and the relationship between Rudd and Ellie. Police collected this data and noted it in the file for continued cross-referencing with other physical evidence. The motive related to Rudd continued to take clear shape as the investigative agency examined the full professional consequences he could face if Ellie's inspection report was completed. The risks of technical suspension, loss of professional certification, facing job transfer or demotion were all factors sufficient to create major pressure. Ellie directly citing an error on equipment for which Rudd was responsible also made him someone who could feel threatened by the inspection results. Every work-related factor involving Rudd indicated the potential to create conflict if he believed Ellie could significantly impact his professional future. Nevertheless, in the initial information gathering phase, all specific evidence only reached the level of possibility rather than confirmation. No direct witnesses saw Rudd in the area where Ellie disappeared. There were no signs of struggle or physical evidence with clear identifying marks linked to Rudd. Some fingerprints in Ellie's car were too smudged for use, and the found plastic fragment could not yet be precisely matched to any equipment or vehicle. When cross-referencing all the data, police saw that although Rudd had motive and notable behaviors, they still lacked any evidence strong enough to prove his direct involvement in Ellie's disappearance. After investigative leads around related individuals yielded no sufficiently strong traces, the file began to lose momentum for processing. No new physical evidence, no new witnesses, and no technical data overcame the limitations of forensic technology at that time. Each suspicious point, though weighty, could not be connected into a complete chain of information. Ultimately, the file fell into a stalled state, with no direction strong enough to push the process further. The absence of direct evidence, combined with limitations in processing physical items, led the case to be placed on the cold case list, frozen for many years, without resolving the true cause of Ellie's disappearance, or the role of any suspects on the list. During the review of backlogged case files at the Nashville Police Department's Evidence Storage Center in 2023, an old evidence box was discovered in a location that did not match the inventory catalog and did not belong to any active case file being checked. Upon examining the code marked on the box label, the responsible officer noticed the identifier belonged to a batch of evidence that had been transferred to storage in 2001, when all evidence from numerous older cases was reclassified under the new coding system. The fact that this box was in the wrong section indicated it had been misplaced for many years without anyone touching it. When the box was opened, the storage staff observed that it contained carefully sealed evidence bags, including a medium-sized plastic fragment, a dark-colored fabric fiber, and a delivery receipt stained with red soil, all bearing identifiers related to the Ellie case. The evidence seals had faded over time but remained intact with visible markings and identification codes, allowing confirmation of their relevance to the long-stalled investigation. These items did not appear in the analysis records from 1997 and were never mentioned in any subsequent investigative phases, indicating that previous investigators had never had the opportunity to fully evaluate their value. Accompanying documents in the box stated that these pieces of evidence were collected near the area where Ellie's vehicle was found, but were never analyzed, because the technical division at the time had recorded that the available technology could not process traces on the plastic fragment surface and could not extract data from the fabric fiber. The delivery receipt was deemed to lack sufficient legal value because the writing had smudged and the soil adhered to the surface made the content difficult to determine. When the box was discovered, the Storage Management Office had to prepare an official report, confirm the condition of the evidence, and conduct a full review of the storage procedures to determine whether the prolonged misplacement was due to a systemic error or individual fault. The plastic fragment was one of the most striking pieces of evidence, because its shape and material matched the type of bumper component used on F-150 trucks from the generation commonly found at construction sites during the 1990s. Identification of the vehicle model was not performed in the initial phase because, in 1997, material comparison tools were still limited, and the investigative team at the time could not reach a clear conclusion about the origin of the plastic piece. Now, when the fragment was removed from the box, the code recorded on the evidence bag showed it had been collected in an area a short distance from where Ellie's vehicle had been parked. This was a location where several witnesses had reported seeing a truck moving through on days close to the time Ellie disappeared. When cross-checked against the list of individuals authorized to operate site trucks, Rudd's name appeared in the group because he had been assigned to drive an F-150 from the generation that the plastic fragment could potentially match. Although this did not yet provide definitive information, the coincidence highlighted the relevance of the evidence. The fabric fiber in the box had a distinctive texture, belonging to the type used in work clothing, dark in color with fairly thick weave. The sample had been properly collected in 1997, but the technical division at the time lacked the capability to conduct in-depth examination of material properties such as origin, manufacturer, or contact traces. In the accompanying record, the collector noted that the fabric fiber was found at the left rear door edge of Ellie's vehicle, caught in the rubber groove. The manner of adhesion suggested the possibility that the fiber had come loose when someone opened or closed the door. When the fiber was taken out of the box, the thick layer of dust covering it confirmed that the seal had never been broken since collection, meaning no prior analyses had ever been conducted. The delivery receipt was the evidence item in the poorest condition. The paper had yellowed and the writing had faded, but the name of the construction site was still legible. The soil adhered to the receipt had the characteristic color of the red clay soil in the Franklin area, where Rudd had been working according to his 1997 schedule. The presence of the delivery receipt inside the evidence box raised questions about why this slip was found near the location where Ellie's vehicle appeared. Although the signature at the bottom of the receipt was no longer clear, the unit transport code was still readable, indicating the receipt belonged to a shipment related to one specific project among the 3 projects on the list that Ellie was inspecting. Investigators in 1997 could not confirm the value of the receipt, but now, its presence in the same box as the plastic fragment and the fabric fiber helped confirm that all 3 pieces of evidence were collected from the same general area. The fact that the evidence box had been misplaced for more than 2 decades meant that none of the information inside had ever been evaluated during previous file reviews, resulting in a serious lack of data when tracing the origin of the evidence. In the 2023 inspection, when the storage team opened the box and verified that the codes on the evidence bags matched the original records, the emergence of these previously overlooked items created a major shift. The plastic fragment had the potential to identify a vehicle model, the fabric fiber had the potential to trace clothing, and the delivery receipt had the potential to link a person to a specific location. None of them had ever been examined before. With the evidence box having been found after many years in the wrong place, the case file, which had seen no progress for a long time, gained new data that required further examination. The appearance of the plastic fragment, the fabric fiber, and the delivery receipt in their original sealed and unanalyzed condition gave the data collected in 1997 an entirely different depth, creating a clear change in how traces related to Ellie were reassessed. This was the first time in 26 years since the case file had been frozen that investigators had in their possession evidence that had never been exploited. When the evidence box was recovered, the investigative agency focused on cross-referencing all data related to the construction site where Rudd had been working at the time of Ellie's disappearance to determine if there was any correlation between his work location and the places where evidence was found. This site was on the list of the 3 projects Ellie was inspecting and was the one that recorded the most violations before she vanished. The construction plans archived at the company showed the locations of equipment placement, entry and exit routes, and the areas where the technical team was authorized to operate. When investigators compared the locations where the fabric fibers and plastic fragment from the evidence file were found with the construction map, they noticed that they matched the area frequently used by trucks for material transport. The characteristic red soil adhering to the delivery ticket also matched the type of soil used in this project, making the relevant scope even clearer. The site access logs, maintained by the management department, through the duty log recorded Rudd as having authorization to enter restricted areas, including the material staging yard and the equipment storage zone. Colleagues confirmed that Rudd regularly drove into these areas to check machinery or assist with system operations. Some even mentioned that he had a habit of moving equipment on his own, without waiting for instructions from the supervisor. While reviewing the company's internal documents, investigators discovered several files showing that Rudd was under considerable pressure due to the violations listed in the inspection report. His direct manager had required him to write an explanatory report and warned that if the issues were not corrected in a short time, he could be suspended. Rudd had signed acknowledgement of the notice and was flagged in the internal evaluation system. In addition, there was a memorandum directing the technical department to prepare for a follow-up inspection that Ellie would conduct to verify the extent of violation corrections. This created double pressure on anyone directly responsible for the cited points. While analyzing possible routes Ellie may have taken before disappearing, the investigative agency noted the possibility that she came near this construction site due to the nature of her work, and because some evidence collected at the scene suggested she was carrying documents related to the project. Ellie's car was found in a location not on her usual routes, but it lay on the road segment connecting her workplace to the outlying area leading to the construction site. Local maps showed that this segment was a shortcut commonly used by many workers to leave the site when they wanted to avoid main traffic. Although there was no surveillance camera on that road in 1997, the car's appearance at that location raised suspicion that someone may have driven it in the direction of the site or left the site via this route. When the three elements, the construction site location, the location where the car was found, and the location where evidence was collected were placed on the same diagram, the investigative agency determined that they formed a sufficiently clear, overlapping area to consider the possibility that someone moved through these points in close succession. Ellie's car location was southwest of the site, while the evidence location was farther northeast, but still along the axis commonly used by the technical team. Those authorized to use trucks at the site all had the ability to move through these points without drawing attention because site trucks frequently appeared along that road. While continuing to gather information, the investigative agency requested the company provide a specific list of truck entry and exit times at the site in the days before and after Ellie disappeared. This list recorded license plates, users, and timeframes logged by the security department. Some data was missing or inaccurately recorded, but during the time frame overlapping with when Ellie was last seen, the truck used by Rudd was not logged in the duty book. This did not confirm that he left the site, but it did show he was not at his assigned area at that time. At the same time, a worker on a shift near that period stated that he saw Rudd drive into the material storage yard at an unusual hour compared to his work schedule. Although this statement could not be taken as definitive, it was retained because of its value for cross-referencing. All the data related to the construction site reflected that the points where evidence appeared, the travel routes, and Rudd's access rights to restricted areas were all within a mutually related scope. The fact that Ellie was inspecting this project, that her documents directly concerned the site, and that the plastic fragment and delivery ticket belonged to the construction area, made the site a location that needed deeper analysis. When the investigative agency entered all the information into the new storage system, the connection between the construction site, the location where Ellie's car was found, and the traces in the evidence box became even clearer. These elements provided a basis for continuing to clarify how the events unfolded during the time Ellie disappeared, and for determining the degree of involvement of those present at the site during that period. In 2024, when the case file was transferred to the State Forensic Division for a comprehensive review of all remaining stored evidence, samples collected from the surface of Ellie's vehicle were entered into the new generation DNA extraction process to determine whether previously overlooked traces could now yield clearer results. Forensic technicians placed each sample into the biochemical processing system to isolate residual epidermal material left on the door handles, steering wheel, and rear door edges, locations considered to have the highest likelihood of retaining contact traces. The new technology made it possible to separate mixed DNA profiles in ways that the laboratory in 1997 could not achieve, and after many hours of separation, the results showed that among the collected samples, there was the presence of a male profile that had never appeared in any of the police department's archived records. This profile was confirmed not to match any member of Ellie's family, not to correspond with anyone who had previously ridden in the vehicle, and not to match rescue personnel or first responders who accessed the scene when the car was discovered. Further analytical steps were carried out to compare the degree of molecular degradation and the estimated persistence time of the DNA layer, thereby confirming that the trace belonged to the period consistent with the time of Ellie's disappearance. When the unknown male DNA sample was uploaded to the expanded comparison system, the result produced no direct match, forcing the technicians to input the data into the genealogy DNA platform to identify genetic relatives. This process used genetic structure to search for open familial connections through pedigree groups, and the analysis result indicated that this male profile was related to the same surname lineage carried by Rudd. The degree of match was not sufficient to identify the individual who left the trace, but the genetic similarity showed that the sample belonged to a person with either distant or close blood relation to Rudd. Investigators recorded this result because it aligned with the primary suspect list, especially since the evidence box discovered earlier also contained items linked to the area where Rudd had worked. During the analysis, the forensic lab determined that the level of degradation in the DNA sample corresponded to traces that had existed for many years, yet still retained molecular structure suitable for partial profile reconstruction. Technicians noted that this type of DNA could only appear when there was direct contact with the vehicle surface for a short period and with sufficient pressure to deposit skin cells, ruling out the possibility that the DNA had entered the vehicle through passive transfer or distant secondary transmission. This made the fact that this man had touched the vehicle a highly significant factor because Ellie had no work-related or personal connection to any individual within the genetic group, similar to the Rudd surname outside of those already on the technician list. While cross-referencing information, the investigative team reviewed individuals related to Rudd in the area or who had worked at construction sites within the same project system. Some administrative documents showed that Rudd's family had a few relatives who once lived in the vicinity, but none appeared in the company's personnel records. Because the genealogy DNA result indicated a connection but lacked specificity, the investigative team had to record it as a lead, but could not treat it as evidence confirming identity. Nevertheless, the DNA trace made verification of individuals in the technician group far more urgent, especially since the DNA molecules were located at the steering wheel and left side door handle points most frequently used by a driver when operating the vehicle. The forensic lab also documented that the combination of the DNA samples and the condition of the vehicle interior reinforced the likelihood that Ellie was not the person controlling the vehicle after leaving the office building. Direct contact traces in the driver's area were identified as belonging to two individuals, Ellie and the unknown male profile. This indicated that a man having taken control of the vehicle had a solid basis, particularly given that the seat and mirror positions did not match Ellie's habits. Investigators noted that the DNA trace on the steering wheel had higher density than on the door handle, suggesting that the man had driven the vehicle long enough to leave substantial traces rather than merely touching it briefly. In the analysis record, technicians further noted that the skin cell layer showed binding characteristics consistent with someone whose occupation regularly involved working in a dusty environment, because the DNA was accompanied by a small amount of mineral particles characteristic of construction site conditions. Although the DNA profile was not sufficient to serve as direct incriminating evidence against any individual, the investigative agency viewed it as grounds to place heightened focus on the technician group, particularly Rudd. The genetic similarity made this group one that required far more thorough checking because the ability to access Ellie, the ability to access the vehicle, and the ability to move through areas connected to the evidence all fell within the scope that the investigative team could verify. In addition, the DNA factor strengthened the hypothesis that Ellie had been forced to leave the vehicle or had lost control of the vehicle after departing the office complex. The fact that the DNA sample originated from an individual with a genealogical link to the Rudd surname created a clearer focus on the suspect group with technical backgrounds and direct contact with construction sites during the period when Ellie was carrying out her final inspection steps. The forensic lab completed its report with all obtained data, including detailed molecular descriptions and degrees of match according to pedigree coefficients, to hand over to the investigative team for continued cross-referencing with personnel in the technician group. When the forensics lab completed the comparison of evidence with soil samples from the area, the analysis results showed that the layer of soil adhering to the delivery ticket found in the evidence box had a mineral composition matching the type of rock extracted at Franklin Quarry, a large quarry located on the southeastern outskirts of Nashville. The mineral samples from this area had a characteristic red hue, high iron oxide content, and a fine-grained form that adhered strongly to paper and fabric, which made the delivery ticket carry precise signs of an area once used as a material transfer yard. Franklin Quarry coincided with the location where Rudd was working around the time Ellie disappeared, and in the company's personnel records, Rudd's name appeared on the list of technicians assigned to assist with the inspection of vibration measuring equipment at this quarry. This was a place with heavy truck traffic, dusty internal roads, and a vast terrain largely separated from residential areas. The spatial characteristics indicated that this area was suitable for someone to move without being noticed, since all entry and exit routes connected directly to secondary roads used daily by workers. Franklin Quarry had a sprawling layout with numerous secondary paths leading to material yards, some of which were restricted zones reserved for those with authorized access. According to the company's access logs from that period, Rudd was among the group permitted to enter restricted areas because his job required inspecting equipment at various points. This showed that he was familiar with the terrain, knew the less trafficked locations, and could move within the quarry without needing to notify many people. Several colleagues had confirmed that Rudd often entered restricted zones to double-check data before shift handovers, and occasionally drove site trucks near material transport areas to inspect equipment conditions on his own. When investigators examined the quarry area map, they saw that the internal road location where the delivery ticket could have fallen matched the truck route commonly used to haul material from the storage yard to the crushing zone. During the re-examination of all evidence, the investigative team requested a check of tire marks at the location where the delivery ticket was found. In 1997, the technical team had collected soil samples and recorded several tire impressions still visible on the ground. Although direct comparison was not possible at that time, the archived records noted that the tire marks had characteristics of the type of truck used on construction sites belonging to the F-150 line or equivalent light-duty trucks. This line was the type Rudd had used during his time working at Franklin Quarry, according to the vehicle assignment records. Although many others at the site also had access to similar vehicles, the fact that the tire marks matched the type driven by Rudd made the evidence significant when cross-referenced with other items linked to him. To clarify activities at the quarry in 1997, the investigative agency requested retrieval of archived internal camera data stored in the company warehouse. The cameras at that time had low quality, recording only in black and white with a low frame rate, but they were still capable of providing information about the timing and movement of vehicles entering and exiting. The footage showed that during a time frame outside the recorded work shift, a truck entered the secondary path leading to the eastern material yard. Due to the limited image quality, the driver's face could not be clearly seen, but the vehicle was noted to have an appearance consistent with the type Rudd used. The footage also showed the truck leaving that location after a short period, but not following the usual route back to the administration building. Instead, it exited through a lesser-known side gate. This detail made the trace noteworthy, because according to regulations at the time, trucks were only permitted to enter the secondary path when there was a specific work request from a supervisor. When cross-referencing data from the quarry, the location where Ellie's car was found, and the connecting route between the two areas, the investigative team determined that the road on which Ellie's vehicle appeared overlapped in part with a possible truck route from Franklin Quarry to the outlying suburbs. Although it could not be determined which vehicle moved at that exact time, the matching tire marks to Rudd's vehicle type and the delivery ticket originating from the site where he worked created a geographically linked chain of data. The presence of the soil sample on the delivery ticket further strengthened the connection between the found evidence and Franklin Quarry because that soil type was not common in residential areas and was only used within the quarry's extraction zone. While analyzing the terrain conditions of Franklin Quarry, investigators noted that this vast area had many untouched patches of land, high rock storage piles, and paths leading into low tree lines, creating blind spots that ordinary workers rarely passed through. Such places could conceal short-term movement or vehicle stops, without leaving obvious traces. Some workers present during that period described that on days with fewer people on site, the outlying areas were often completely deserted, and truck noise easily blended into the sound of machinery operating across the entire site. This allowed someone with access, such as Rudd, to move without drawing attention from other employees. When all the data was brought together in a single cross-reference, the matches involving the soil sample, delivery ticket, tire marks, and Rudd's work history at Franklin Quarry fell within a consistent scope. The detail of the truck appearing at an unreasonable hour made the camera footage a key piece of material in re-examining movements related to the quarry during the time frame overlapping with the collection of the delivery ticket. When these elements were placed side by side, they formed a verifiable chain of information regarding location, timing, and the potential movement of vehicles within the Franklin Quarry area. While the case file was being reviewed alongside the recovered evidence, a phone call was transferred to the investigative agency from a man who introduced himself as a retired worker who had been employed at Franklin Quarry during the time Ellie disappeared. This person stated that he had remained silent for many years out of fear of being considered involved, but now wished to provide information due to declining health and a feeling that he needed to share what he had witnessed. When the investigating officer met him at his private residence, the man appeared fatigued, walked slowly, and said he had carried this memory for too long. He recounted that on the very night Ellie disappeared, he was present at the site late because he had taken an overtime shift to cover for a colleague. At that time, the facility was almost deserted, with only the sounds of machinery winding down after the main shift and dim light from scattered light poles across the area. While preparing to leave, he heard the sound of a truck engine approaching along the secondary access road leading to the restricted zone. This was an area only technicians responsible for equipment inspection were permitted to enter, and at that hour the shift had already ended, so no one was authorized to operate a truck per regulations. When he looked toward the source of the sound, he saw a truck that matched the shape of those assigned to the technical team, moving slowly through the dark area and heading straight toward the entrance to the Eastern Materials Yard. The truck's headlights cast patchy light across the red dirt ground, creating a narrow beam that allowed him to make out the figure behind the wheel. He described the person as having a build matching Rudd's, including shoulder width and sitting posture. Having worked alongside Rudd for many years, he needed only to see the back silhouette and the way the person gripped the steering wheel to recognize him. The man recounted that he stood not far away but did not dare call out because he did not understand why Rudd would be in the restricted area at such an hour. When he took a few more steps to get a clearer view, the truck had already turned onto a curved path and disappeared behind a large rock formation. He said he felt confused in that moment because he knew driving into the restricted area at an unauthorized time was a violation, but what kept him silent was the fear that if he reported it, he would be dragged into trouble, especially since no one else was present to corroborate his account. When news of Ellie's disappearance spread in the days that followed, he felt what he had seen that night was connected, but uncertainty and fear led him to choose silence. He said he had lived for many years with a sense of guilt, because the incident resurfaced every time he thought about the people who were at the quarry that night. As his health declined, he felt he no longer wanted to keep it inside, and decided to contact the authorities to recount what he had seen with his own eyes. During the statement-taking session, the investigator asked him to describe the vehicle's movement in as much detail as possible. He said the truck was not traveling fast, but it also did not stop or hesitate, moving as though the driver knew exactly where he wanted to go. One detail he remembered clearly was the distinctive rumbling sound of the F-150 truck engine when it took the curve on the rough surface, and he recognized it as the type of vehicle Rudd usually drove. In his recollection, no one else in the technical team used that particular truck during extended shifts because most workers had already left before he finished his assigned task. He also recalled the faint smell of engine oil carried on the wind, something present only on nights when trucks moved through sparsely populated areas. When the investigative team compared the time frame the witness recalled with the forensic data obtained from the DNA samples on the steering wheel and door handles of Ellie's vehicle, they noted that the moment Rudd's truck appeared in the restricted area fell within the time window consistent with the traces identified by the forensic lab. This created a correlation between the witness statement and the DNA profile extracted from the surface of Ellie's vehicle. The witness further described that right before he left the quarry, he saw the vehicle's headlights again in the distance. This time the truck was heading toward the secondary exit, rather than returning to the office area. The light reflecting off the rocky ground made him realize the vehicle was moving in the direction of leaving the quarry. He did not see the driver when the truck departed because darkness obscured the cabin, but the pattern of movement and the way the vehicle turned reminded him of how Rudd handled a vehicle, since Rudd had a habit of leaning the truck slightly to the left when cornering to avoid potholes. The investigator asked why he had not come forward during the past 2 decades. He replied that at the time there was no evidence beyond his own memory, and he feared his statement would be regarded as speculation. He was also concerned about being pulled into questioning and having to explain why he was at the quarry during those hours, even though he had been authorized for the overtime shift. He explained that his decision to speak up stemmed solely from a need to tell the truth before he no longer had the ability to do so. Once the entire statement was recorded and signed, the investigative team noted that the details provided by the witness aligned with the established time frame supported by the DNA samples, physical evidence traces, and internal camera footage that had captured truck movements during hours inconsistent with the official schedule. The man's accurate description of the truck's path, the secondary access route into the restricted area, and the direction the vehicle took when exiting the quarry matched the geographic data preserved in the 1997 case file. Through his account, the witness provided an important additional piece to the timeline of movements that occurred around Franklin Quarry on the night Ellie disappeared, and this memory was entered into the case file for continued cross-referencing with other data. When the evidence data, witness statements, and DNA samples had been systematized, the investigative agency began using image restoration technology to reevaluate the blurry, noisy, and low-detail 1,997 security camera footage. AI-powered image enhancement technology allowed each frame to be reconstructed by increasing contrast, removing noise, sharpening body structure, and clarifying blurred movements, until the figure of the man standing near Ellie in the final moment she appeared could be identified. After multiple processing passes, the forensic specialists obtained frames clear enough to determine the basic characteristics of this man, including shoulder width, torso tilt, relative height, and gait pattern as he moved toward the edge of the parking lot. These characteristics were compared against body identification data from the group of technicians in the files, which included shoulder angle, arm hang when standing, and weight shift rhythm to the left foot. Rudd's build, as described by colleagues and shown in the company's internal images, displayed a distinctive posture when standing and turning, and the forensic specialists noted a close similarity between the figure in the footage and his physical characteristics. Although absolute identification could not be made from the images alone, the comparison showed a high likelihood that the man appearing next to Ellie had body measurements more consistent with Rudd's structure than with the other individuals remaining on the list. Once the images had been improved, the investigative team combined them with the location data of Ellie's car to reconstruct the sequence of movement across consecutive time points. They marked the moment Ellie left the building, estimated the duration of her conversation with the man, then compared it to the time her car was found in a location far outside her normal route. Next, they overlaid these time markers with the path determined from evidence such as the plastic fragment, delivery ticket, and soil sample. Each time point was placed alongside the travel data for the F-150 truck type recorded in the movement logs at Franklin Quarry. From this, they created a movement map showing intersection points within overlapping time windows between the truck's appearance, evidence locations, and the direction in which Ellie's car was driven. This map illustrated the plausible path of the involved vehicle and indicated that Ellie's car was most likely redirected by someone else. When reconstructing movement based on evidence, the investigative team used simulation algorithms to calculate the probability that Ellie's car was stopped in an area near the construction site and then continued to be driven to the discovery location. The adjusted driver's seat and rearview mirror, the presence of unknown male DNA on the steering wheel and door handles, and witness statements from the quarry were all factored into the probability model. The algorithm showed that to produce the combination of fingerprint traces, evidence placement, and seat adjustment, a man of similar size to Rudd had made direct contact with the vehicle. When these parameters were input into the motion simulation, the results indicated a very low likelihood that Ellie drove the car out of the area herself. Based on average travel time data for trucks from Franklin Quarry to the area where Ellie's car was found, the results showed a match between the period when a witness saw a truck entering the restricted zone and the time Ellie's car was identified at a location off her normal route. The restored images from the 1,997 camera also captured the moment Ellie made a slight backward motion and turned her face to the side as if reacting to the man standing close by. Posture analysts pointed out that this movement was consistent with the reflex of someone being approached too closely or placed under pressure. Combined with data from the image enhancement model, They determined that the distance between Ellie and the man narrowed before both disappeared from the lit area, leading forensic specialists to assess that the interaction between the two was not voluntary. When cross-referenced with truck data from Franklin Quarry, they noted that the time a truck appeared in the restricted zone coincided with the moment Ellie vanished from the camera's field of view. In addition, DNA recovered from Ellie's car showed the unknown male sample in areas the driver would have touched, indirectly reinforcing the possibility that the man in the camera footage was the one who drove the car afterward. At the same time, the movement map showed that evidence items such as the delivery ticket and plastic fragment had fallen along the route connecting Franklin Quarry to the suburban area where Ellie's car was found. The presence of red quarry soil on both pieces of evidence led the investigative team to conclude that this route was the one traversed by the involved vehicle. Forensic simulation determined a high probability that Ellie was forced into a truck shortly after leaving the office complex, based on the coincidence of traces, images, and behavior. When analyzing the condition of the car's interior, including contact marks, item positions, and the imbalance in seat arrangement, forensic specialists concluded that Ellie was unlikely to have been in control of the vehicle. The combination of images showing the man beside Ellie, DNA evidence, truck data, and witness statements formed a chain of connections strong enough for forensic assessment that the victim was most likely taken aboard that man's vehicle on the same night. With these results, the reconstruction model determined that the time Ellie no longer appeared on any camera coincided with the moment the truck entered a remote area of Franklin Quarry, and based on the environmental conditions of the area, along with witness descriptions, the forensic conclusion was that the victim most likely died on the night she disappeared. When the investigative team approached the company's document storage warehouse to cross-reference records related to the project that was in the inspection phase under Ellie's responsibility, they discovered a sealed container holding numerous technical reports that had been sealed since 1997, and which the company claimed had never been reopened. Among the old document sets, investigators found a copy of the report that Ellie had been preparing to submit before she disappeared. This document set consisted of many pages detailing the extent of technical violations at Franklin Quarry, including assessments of measurement equipment wear conditions, and certain information about items that failed to meet operational requirements. This was the type of report that could directly impact the company being suspended from mining operations if the deficiencies were not corrected within the stipulated deadline, and Rudd's name appeared on the list of technicians directly responsible for many of the items rated as non-compliant. As investigators reviewed the contents of the document set, they noticed several handwritten marginal notes that did not match Ellie's handwriting from previous reports. These notes suggested changing the assessment level from non-compliant to requires further review, or downgrading the risk level from high to medium. The ink used in these handwritten portions also differed from the ink Ellie used on the pages she wrote, and when compared with Ellie's personal notebook, the handwriting did not match. The handwritten notes referred to items directly related to Rudd's responsibilities, leading document analysis specialists to conclude that this intervention was inconsistent with standard inspection procedures. Some pages also showed signs of having been unstapled and restapled, with characteristic creases on the paper edges from being flipped through repeatedly, indicating that someone had handled the documents after Ellie had drafted them. On another page, the detailed evaluation of vibration equipment had been altered with heavier pen strokes than the surrounding text, showing an action of writing over the original writing. Document examiners used magnifying glasses to analyze pen pressure depth and confirmed that the overwritten line originally read, "fails to meet safety requirements." Such manual alteration of assessments could only occur when someone wanted to reduce the perceived severity of the errors, especially in cases where these violations directly affected the work capability of the technicians in Rudd's team. When investigators checked the work logs, they found a request from the management department asking Rudd to provide a separate explanation for why the equipment under his responsibility had not been maintained on schedule, and this explanation request coincided with the time Ellie recorded the deficiencies in her report. In addition, there was an internal memorandum from a supervisor demanding urgent correction of the outstanding items to avoid an adverse audit. The fact that several serious errors appeared in the work area under Rudd's responsibility meant that Ellie's report had the potential to trigger a series of professional consequences, including loss of technical certification and suspension. This aligned with the motive that investigators had already identified when examining prior professional conflicts between Ellie and Rudd. One colleague had confirmed that Rudd appeared irritated upon learning that Ellie's report would directly affect his performance evaluation. While reviewing the documents, investigators also discovered another unfinished draft report by Ellie that had been stapled into the bottom corner of the document box, in which Ellie had underlined items requiring urgent repair. All of these items fell within the scope of Rudd's responsibility. When making an overall assessment of the documents, analysis specialists observed that the copy of the report found in storage contained unauthorized and distorted changes compared to the original draft. These changes benefited solely the person directly responsible for the equipment rated as non-compliant. This made the possibility that the person who altered the document did so to avoid professional consequences a clearly emerging factor in the file. Document examiners also determined that the positioning and stroke characteristics of the pen marks did not align with Ellie's handwriting style because the altered strokes in the report copy showed a habit of heavy pen pressure at the beginning of strokes and a sudden release of force at the end, features absent from Ellie's writing. During the analysis, they further noted faint ink impressions transferred to the following page due to heavy pressure, a characteristic commonly observed in Rudd's handwriting according to other internal documents provided by the company. To clarify the context, the investigative team requested that the company provide the minutes of the inspection meeting. In the minutes, the supervisor recorded that Ellie had reported that many items needed to retain the non-compliant rating, and that one technician disagreed with the inspection results. No name was specified in the minutes, but now, when placed alongside the other data, the presence of handwritten notes in the document set increased the significance of this detail. Archived records also showed that Rudd had previously been reprimanded for altering an evaluation item in another report outside Ellie's scope. In the disciplinary record, it was noted that his actions could be considered interference with inspection procedures if repeated. When all observations, documents, and traces on the report copy were entered into the case file, the investigative team confirmed that the behavior evident in the document set was consistent with the motive of someone seeking to avoid severe professional consequences. The handwritten alterations, changed assessments, overwritten original text, and downgraded warning levels all aligned with the interests of the person named in the list of technicians responsible for the violations recorded by Ellie. The document set, therefore, became an element that clarified criminal motive, because its contents demonstrated that Ellie submitting a complete report could lead to sanctions resulting in the technician being suspended or facing high-level disciplinary action. When the data from technical records, inspection reports, witness statements, and company documents were compiled, the picture of the motive behind the incident gradually became clearer in the way the elements directly related to Rudd's position at Franklin Quarry during the time Ellie was conducting inspections. The content of the report Ellie was preparing to submit included numerous serious violations, most of which fell within the scope of work for which Rudd was responsible, and according to industry regulations, if this report was forwarded to the overseeing authority, the person directly responsible for the violating items could face suspension or loss of professional certification. The severity of the items rated as not meeting safety requirements increased the risk of the company being penalized and at the same time placed Rudd in a position of personal accountability scrutiny. The document file showed that he had previously been warned for concealing errors in another project before Ellie recorded the violations at Franklin Quarry, and the disciplinary record explicitly stated that he had altered evaluation content without authorization. This indicated that interfering with inspection documents was not new behavior for him. The presence of handwriting that did not match Ellie's pen strokes on a copy of the report, along with proposed changes to downgrade warning levels, showed that someone had deliberately attempted to downplay the severity of the errors. When this factor was placed alongside the possibility of job loss and loss of professional certification, Rudd's motive to avoid professional consequences became consistent with the pressure he was facing. Forensic reconstruction of the night in 1997 showed that Ellie did not leave her vehicle voluntarily, and the presence of unknown male DNA on the steering wheel reinforced the likelihood that she was coerced in the short time after leaving the office building. When specialists analyzed the figure in the restored camera footage and noted a strong similarity in posture and body build to Rudd, combined with the time when a witness confirmed seeing a truck moving into the restricted area on the night Ellie disappeared, a picture of a deliberate act gradually emerged in the file. Forensic details about the seat position, contact marks, and the fact that Ellie's car was driven by someone of a different size from her indicated the likelihood that Ellie resisted when forced to leave the vehicle. Evidence traces at Franklin Quarry, including the soil-stained delivery ticket and the plastic fragment from the vehicle line Rudd had driven, formed a chain of data linking to the possibility that the truck had been used to force the victim to move. When considering the behavior of someone wanting to avoid punishment, the possibility of a confrontation between Ellie and the person carrying out the coercion became consistent with both the forensic findings and the timeline. Ellie was described in the records as someone who adhered strictly to technical procedures and would not accept report changes without accurate data, which could have led her to refuse altering the evaluation content in a way favorable to Rudd. In the event the victim was forced to change the report or was threatened to remain silent, the possibility of resistance could have caused the situation to spiral beyond the initial perpetrator's control. Forensic analysis of evidence collected from the vehicle's surface, interior, and at the quarry showed that the victim was unlikely to have left the area in a state capable of self-movement. The appearance of unknown male DNA at the driver's position and marks indicating strong contact in the driver's seat area showed that coercive behavior was present in the moments Ellie disappeared from camera view. When a witness described seeing a truck enter the restricted area at a time corresponding to the forensic timeline, and when internal camera footage recorded the truck leaving the quarry in a direction inconsistent with the work schedule, this helped reinforce the likelihood that the truck had been used in the activity that caused the incident. While reconstructing movement based on evidence, the simulation algorithm showed the time points most consistent with the scenario in which the victim was forced into a truck upon leaving the office parking lot area and then taken to a remote section of Franklin Quarry. The simulations also determined that the time recalled by the witness matched the forensic determination of tire mark appearance, showing high correlation between the statement and the physical evidence. When this volume of information was cross-referenced with the inspection report, the motive to avoid punishment became a weighty factor in the file. The serious nature of the technical violations recorded by Ellie not only affected the company's operations, but also directly threatened Rudd's professional position. If the report was submitted, Rudd would face not only the risk of job loss, but also the possibility of being barred from practicing his profession. Previous disciplinary records showed that he had attempted to conceal errors before, and this aligned with the possibility that he tried to persuade Ellie to alter the report. Forensic analysis of the pen strokes overlaid on the not meeting safety requirements evaluation revealed the presence of document tampering behavior. Document specialists determined that the handwriting carried characteristics of someone who habitually applied strong pressure when writing, a trait appearing in documents Rudd had previously signed. This created a consistent chain of data: work pressure, strong motive to avoid consequences, history of concealing violations, presence in the restricted area, DNA on the vehicle, and attempts to alter the report. When these elements were placed together within the same forensic system, the file showed that the disappearance was not the result of random coincidence, but was consistent with deliberate behavior aimed at avoiding punishment. Ellie's resistance caused the coercive act to spiral out of control, and forensic determination concluded that the victim was most likely killed shortly after being removed from the work area. The forensic chain regarding contact marks, DNA traces, truck location, and time simulation reinforced the officially recorded motive in the file: avoiding punishment and protecting the professional interests of the person directly responsible for the violations in the project. When all the forensic data, witness statements, and analysis results from the forensic lab were entered into the system, the layering of evidence created a coherent structure that allowed the investigative agency to clearly see how each fragment of information connected to the others. The DNA sample extracted from the surface of the steering wheel and door handles of Ellie's vehicle was the first layer of evidence to be cross-referenced. The unknown male profile did not appear in any criminal records or archived personnel data, but when submitted for genealogy DNA analysis, the system confirmed a genetic similarity to the Rudd surname. The degree of match fell within the range classified as direct or indirect familial relation, meaning the DNA sample could not belong to a random individual, but had a blood connection to the Rudd lineage. When placed in the context of technicians authorized to access trucks in the quarry site, the presence of the DNA sample near the driver's position made this information one of the key pieces of the puzzle. During the evidence review, the plastic fragment recovered near the location of Ellie's vehicle was analyzed and identified as belonging to the F-150 truck line from the late 1990s generation. According to the vehicle records provided by the company, Rudd had been assigned an F-150 of the same model year during the period when Ellie was conducting inspections. This gave grounds to the possibility that the plastic fragment had come off a vehicle operated by Rudd. The surface of the fragment showed characteristic scratches from impact with a hard object, and these scratches matched the type of wear commonly seen on quarry vehicles when traveling over the rough, rocky sections of Franklin Quarry. When the polymer sample from the fragment was compared with samples from other pieces of the same vehicle type, materials specialists noted a high degree of similarity in polymer structure and fading color tone. The plastic fragment was therefore linked to a vehicle of the type used by Rudd at the quarry. The fabric fiber recovered from the rubber groove of Ellie's rear door was another layer of evidence showing matching characteristics. Textile analysis revealed it to be a coarse fabric used in mining industry technical uniforms, specifically the uniform model supplied by the company to the technician team in 1997. When compared with uniforms still held in storage, the fiber structure, dye color, and degree of fading matched the type of work jacket that the technical team was required to wear when entering machinery areas. Only individuals in the technician group had the opportunity to leave a fiber of this type at the location of Ellie's vehicle. The position where the fiber was caught indicated contact at the rear door edge, an angle where someone forcefully opening the door could accidentally tear or dislodge a thread from their jacket. This aligned with the possibility that someone attempted to open the vehicle door from the outside, and the presence of a mining industry fiber on Ellie's vehicle suggested a direct connection between a person wearing technical work clothing and Ellie's vehicle. The soil adhering to the delivery receipt and to a portion of the fabric fiber also matched the soil at Franklin Quarry. The soil sample, separated by the forensic lab, contained iron oxide in a characteristic ratio found only in this particular quarry area. When further microscopic mineral particles were analyzed, geologists noted the presence of rock dust fragments from crushing and stone transport processes, ruling out the possibility that the soil had come from other material yards in the region. The fact that the delivery receipt carried this type of soil and the plastic fragment showed scratches consistent with the terrain of Franklin Quarry made this location a strong point of convergence in the forensic data chain. The timeline constructed from the witness statement, recovered camera footage, and forensic data clearly showed Rudd's presence at multiple critical points. The witness who had worked at Franklin Quarry confirmed seeing a truck matching the shape of the one Rudd drove entering the restricted area within the exact time frame of Ellie's disappearance. Internal camera footage recorded the truck entering a sparsely trafficked area during hours outside the official shift, and its direction of travel matched the zone where evidence was found. Motion reconstruction algorithms based on the time Ellie left the office building, the time the truck appeared on camera, and the time soil particles could have fallen from a vehicle onto the sloping area of the quarry, created a unified sequence. In this timeline, the movements of the vehicle used by Rudd aligned with the forensic time markers for when Ellie's vehicle was driven to a location outside her usual route. When all the data layers were combined, the striking matches among the DNA, plastic fragment, fabric fiber, soil, and timeline formed a highly cohesive forensic structure. DNA with a genealogical link to the Rudd surname appeared on the steering wheel and door handles of Ellie's vehicle, places a driver would certainly have contacted. The plastic fragment from the vehicle type used by Rudd appeared near where Ellie had parked. The fiber from a technical uniform fell into the rear door edge of the vehicle, indicating contact from someone wearing quarry work clothing. The soil on the delivery receipt matched Franklin Quarry, where Rudd worked and where the witness saw the truck moving at an unreasonable hour. The timeline showed a man whose build matched Rudd's appearing near Ellie before she vanished, and a truck with characteristics matching Rudd's entering the exact key area. The forensic lab recorded that when these evidence layers were placed side by side, the level of correspondence reached a threshold strong enough for the investigative agency to submit the file requesting an arrest warrant because each type of evidence independently demonstrated a connection between Rudd and the critical points of the case. And when combined, they formed a seamless chain linking behavior, location, and physical evidence within the forensic scope. When Rudd was invited to the station to provide information, the investigators asked many questions related to his timeline on the night Ellie disappeared, his work location, and any factors that could explain why a truck matching the type he regularly used appeared in the restricted area. During the first interview session, Rudd appeared calm, but maintained a clear distance in his responses. However, when investigators referenced certain pieces of evidence without giving details, Rudd inadvertently leaked information that had never been released to the public. He stated that the plastic fragment by the roadside couldn't belong to my truck because my truck doesn't have a damaged mud flap, even though the location of the fragment and the mud flap characteristic had never been disclosed to the press or anyone outside the specialized team. The fact that Rudd knew about this detail showed he had direct knowledge of the evidence. Investigators noted a clear change in Rudd's facial expression when asked why the truck recorded on camera appeared on the secondary path leading into the restricted area of Franklin Quarry. He replied that maybe someone borrowed the truck, but when asked to name anyone who might have borrowed it, he could not provide a single name, and even claimed he couldn't recall when he had left the truck at the site lot. Rudd's story shifted within just a few minutes when he first said he wasn't working a shift that evening, but when reminded of his shift sign-in still on record, he corrected himself to say he might have stopped by for a few minutes. Investigators asked him to verify his time of presence, but Rudd only gave vague answers, making his statement increasingly noteworthy. When specialists cross-checked with internal company data, they found that most of what he said did not match the records. During the interview, one investigator mentioned that Ellie had been seen speaking with a man in the parking lot. Rudd immediately responded with the statement, "I wasn't standing near her that night," even though the investigators had never stated that the man in the footage was him. This detail was recorded because it showed an excessive level of defensiveness, a pattern often seen when a suspect tries to deny behavior that investigators have not yet directly accused him of. When asked why the contact marks on the driver's seat of Ellie's car did not match her height, Rudd quickly explained that maybe she adjusted the seat for more comfort. But when investigators described the degree of seat displacement as far beyond what someone of Ellie's height could reasonably adjust, he went silent before changing his answer to, "I don't know how she usually adjusted the seat." The rapid shifts in his statements demonstrated instability and drew attention from the entire investigative team. At one point, under heavy questioning, Rudd stated that he left the site at 8 p.m. and went straight home. Investigators asked whether he left through the main gate or the side gate. Rudd answered with a remark showing he knew the main gate camera was malfunctioning. "If I went through the main gate, the camera wouldn't have captured anything anyway." The detail about the faulty camera was information contained only in internal reports and had never been made public. Upon hearing this, investigators paused note-taking for several seconds, because Rudd had unintentionally confirmed that he knew the camera status on the night of the disappearance, something someone not present at the site would have no way of knowing. When questioned about how he knew the camera condition, Rudd said that anyone who's been there long enough knows, but according to records, the system was only down for a short period relative to the shift, and ordinary workers had no reason to know this specific detail. Avoidant behavior continued when investigators asked Rudd to describe his location again during the time frame when the camera recorded the truck. At first he said he didn't use the truck that day. After being confronted with the restored blurry footage, he insisted that anyone could have driven a truck that looks the same. When asked again about the shift sign-in, he denied it, then confirmed it, then said he remembered the wrong day. When pressed about his inability to provide an alibi, Rudd shifted to saying he didn't make a habit of remembering every hour and minute, but the specialist noticed he avoided every question that touched on time points, matching the forensic data. When he could not explain why the truck appeared in the restricted area, Rudd became visibly tense, repeatedly licking his lips and shifting his sitting posture. Investigators described his demeanor at that point as unstable, with a higher-pitched voice and erratic response speed. Rudd's attorney, who was present at his request, immediately demanded that the interview be stopped, citing that, "My client needs a break." Nevertheless, the interview had already captured in full the numerous slips that Rudd did not expect could become critical evidence. One of his most notable statements was, "I didn't take her into the material yard, I only," at which point he fell silent and stopped when his lawyer instructed him not to answer further. This unfinished sentence was recorded verbatim, and investigators immediately noted it because it demonstrated awareness of a location he should not have known about in the context of the case. When the session ended, the investigative team held an emergency meeting to cross-reference Rudd's entire statement with the forensic data. All of Rudd's slips were tied to information that had never been released. The points he mentioned, the details he denied then admitted, and especially his knowledge of the plastic fragment's location, the faulty camera, and the entry path to the material yard, were all viewed as indicators of actual presence in the chain of events. These verbal slips became key pieces that completed the evidentiary structure built by the forensic layers, and when the investigators finalized the interview report, they recommended an immediate arrest warrant that same day, based on the direct connection between Rudd's statements and the collected evidence. When the case file was completed, and Rudd's inconsistent witness statements were pieced together with the forensic evidence, the investigators presented the entire set of documents to the Davidson County District Attorney's Office to request an arrest warrant, and the Davidson County judge signed the warrant immediately after reviewing the level of connection between Rudd and the full chain of evidence. The arrest warrant was sent to several neighboring states because Rudd frequently traveled through Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama to take on private repair contracts after leaving the quarry many years earlier. The U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force coordinated with Kentucky police to locate Rudd at a roadside motel off I-65, where he was temporarily staying while repairing a rented truck. When officers approached, Rudd stepped out of the room with a calm expression and showed no resistance. He raised his hands as instructed and was handcuffed while 3 officers read the arrest warrant according to procedure. When he heard the 3 charges, he was being prosecuted for homicide, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. Rudd asked only one question: "What is this based on?" But he was not permitted to discuss it at the scene. People at the motel watched as he was led away. None realized that the man just arrested was the central figure in a disappearance case that had lasted 28 years. The investigative team immediately seized Rudd's personal belongings, including several documents related to the old quarry site, a set of technical tools, and some financial papers. Everything was sealed and transferred to the Davidson County Evidence Unit. Rudd was transported back to Nashville in a specialized vehicle, and throughout the journey he answered no questions, only staring straight ahead. Upon arrival at headquarters, he was handed over to the Davidson County Jail to undergo intake procedures and await his initial interview with appointed counsel. The district attorney's office took possession of all evidence items and prepared the official charging documents. Each piece of evidence was categorized: the plastic fragment, the fabric fiber, the delivery receipt, the DNA data, the forensic maps, the witness statements, and the interview transcripts recording Rudd's slip-of-the-tongue remarks. Every item was packaged according to court standards for presentation. At the first hearing, the judge considered the bail request presented by Rudd's attorney, but the prosecutor argued that the case had existed for 28 years, that there was substantial evidence showing the suspect had previously concealed information, that he posed a flight risk, and that he had given statements inconsistent with the forensic data. The judge denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the length of time the case had remained unresolved. Rudd was returned to his cell and scheduled to meet with his attorney to prepare for trial. The prosecutor transferred the complete case file into the sealed evidence system and requested that the technical divisions maintain preservation of the recovered camera footage and DNA samples for use as trial evidence. The investigative agency continued to forward supplemental notes, including the detailed forensic timeline cross-reference, the forensic lab's conclusion regarding the DNA sample's connection to the Rudd surname, and the materials specialist's analysis of the likelihood that the plastic fragment came from the F-150 truck Rudd had operated. All of this was entered into the evidence system for use at trial. The district attorney's office finalized the indictment, listing each prosecuted act. For the homicide charge, the indictment cited forensic data indicating the likelihood that the victim died on the night of the disappearance. For the kidnapping charge, the indictment cited the presence of unknown DNA at the driver's position and evidence showing Ellie was forced to leave the vehicle. For the evidence tampering charge, the indictment listed the handwritten alterations in the report, the overwritten ink marks, and Rudd's false statements made to conceal those changes. When Rudd appeared in court for the first time wearing a gray prison jumpsuit, the courtroom was so quiet that the escort officer's footsteps could be heard. He answered his name, age, and address according to procedure, and remained silent. His attorney entered a plea of not guilty but did not request bail reduction or new release conditions. The judge asked both sides to confirm the trial start date and agreed on a schedule in 2025 to ensure the parties had adequate preparation time without unnecessary delay, given that this was a case that had remained pending for nearly 3 decades. While the parties prepared, the investigative team forwarded additional supporting documents to the prosecutor, including a detailed comparison between Rudd's slip-of-the-tongue statements and each piece of physical evidence. One portion was the transcript recording a dangling remark Rudd made during a pre-arrest interview, in which he inadvertently mentioned the materials yard area matching the quarry location where key evidence had been recovered. The prosecutor added this statement to the list of evidence to be presented at trial because it demonstrated knowledge of a location he had no legitimate reason to reference. In addition, forensic specialists prepared a simulation presentation reconstructing the night Ellie disappeared, based on DNA data, recovered camera footage, and the truck's travel route. Rudd was transferred to a high-security detention facility pending trial, and the arrest warrant was widely circulated in Tennessee's internal judicial system records to prevent any errors during custody. The prosecutor confirmed receipt of sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and submitted a request to the Davidson County Court to schedule the trial within the same year. The indictment was read aloud to the defendant to ensure he fully understood the charges. Rudd only nodded and gave brief answers, offering no explanation or objection during the hearing. Once the prosecution file was finalized, the Davidson County Court set the trial date within 2025 to guarantee the case could be presented to a jury while the forensic evidence retained full value and the witness testimony remained clearly preserved. In this way, the entire process from arrest warrant to trial scheduling unfolded continuously within the same year, based on an evidence structure that met the threshold for courtroom presentation. When the trial opened at Davidson County Criminal Court, the courtroom was packed with the jury, prosecutors, defense attorneys, forensic experts, and Ellie's family. No body had been found, but the entire body of forensic records, simulation data, and evidence accumulated over nearly 3 decades became the centerpiece of the indictment. The prosecution began its presentation by walking through the forensic timeline, starting from the moment Ellie left the building, appeared next to an unidentified man, then completely vanished from every camera. The prosecution placed each time marker alongside the evidence: unknown male DNA matching the Rudd family line, the plastic fragment from the F-150 truck line that Rudd had driven, fabric fibers from a technician uniform found inside Ellie's car, the delivery ticket stained with red soil from Franklin Quarry. Each point was projected on the large screen, and the jury followed every step. The prosecution did not mention assumptions. It used the technical data itself to prove of the presence of a single individual at every key point. When the forensic expert was called to the stand, they described the process of separating mixed DNA using next-generation techniques that allowed differentiation of blended molecules, something the 1997 lab could not do. The DNA sample on the steering wheel and door handles of Ellie's car carried characteristics of a male related by blood to the Rudd family, and Ellie had no acquaintance or contact with any individual with such a genealogical connection. That was the first layer of evidence presented to the court. When the plastic fragment was introduced, the materials expert described the polymer structure, scratch patterns, and degree of fading that matched the type of truck Rudd used at the site. The correspondence between the evidence and Rudd's vehicle operation habits was presented through 3D simulation, showing how the fragment could have detached when the truck traveled over the rough terrain of Franklin Quarry. The jury observed close-up images of the fragment, every crack line and the layer of soil clinging to the edge. The fabric fibers were presented next by the prosecution, still sealed in the evidence bag from 1997. The textile analysis expert described that this coarse, thick-woven fabric belonged exclusively to uniforms worn by the mining industry's technical team when entering machinery areas. The fibers were found in the rear door rubber channel of Ellie's car, a position indicating strong contact when someone opened the door from outside. No one outside the technician group would have had access to this specific uniform type. The jury watched the magnified examination showing individual dyed fibers and layers of fading characteristic of the dusty stone environment. When the delivery ticket was presented in court, the prosecution asked the geologist to analyze the red soil adhering to the paper. The expert confirmed that the soil sample contained iron oxide ratios and minerals characteristic of Franklin Quarry, not present in residential areas or other material yards in Nashville. The delivery ticket belonged to a shipment batch from the exact period Rudd was working there, and its location near where Ellie's car was found became a powerful point of forensic correspondence. Each soil layer was separated under the microscope, and the jury observed the distinctive deep red color found only at the quarry. The prosecution continued presenting the forensic timeline by integrating these pieces of evidence into a simulated journey map. They displayed the truck's recorded movement on camera at a time outside the work shift, matching the direction toward the area where a witness saw Rudd's truck. The AI-restored video was played in the courtroom, showing the figure standing next to Ellie, with shoulder shape and turning motion matching Rudd's body structure as analyzed by the identification expert. The prosecution offered no speculation, only allowing the jury to compare the two body models displayed on screen, every shoulder angle, every arm movement. When the forensic simulation displayed the reconstruction of the disappearance night, each step was presented: Ellie's standing position, the direction the car moved, the moment DNA was left on the steering wheel, the moment the delivery ticket fell from the truck, and the area where fibers were pulled from the uniform. The simulation combined these elements into a seamless chain of motion, with each data layer fitting together at a level that demanded the jury's attention. The prosecution emphasized that no evidence indicated Ellie left the area voluntarily. When it was the defense's turn, Rudd's attorney attempted to challenge the validity of the forensic timeline, arguing that without a body, death could not be established. However, the prosecution called the forensic expert to describe how the DNA samples on the driver's seat and door handles clearly indicated coercion. There were no signs that Ellie had adjusted the seat herself or left sliding marks on the plastic surfaces. The absence of a body did not diminish the certainty of the forensic conclusion, because the strong contact marks, the timing of Ellie's disappearance, witness statements about the truck, and the appearance of the evidence all aligned with the highest probability scenario. Death occurred that very night. The forensic expert stated clearly that the entire model only became coherent if death was assumed. Every other assumption created gaps that the data could not fill. The jury listened to this analysis in silence. When Rudd was called to the stand, he chose to answer some questions. The prosecution asked him why the truck appeared in the restricted area at the exact time Ellie disappeared. Rudd replied that maybe someone used the truck, but the prosecution presented data showing that no one but him had the truck keys that night. The prosecution asked why handwriting in the inspection report carried his pen strokes. Rudd denied it, but could not explain why the strokes matched documents he had previously signed. When the prosecution played the interview recording where he inadvertently mentioned the plastic fragment and the faulty camera, Rudd lowered his head and offered no reasonable explanation for how he knew those details. The jury observed his reaction every second. The defense attorney tried to argue that the forensic timeline could contain margin of error, but the prosecution countered by presenting the full time discrepancy analysis results, proving that any such margin could not alter the fundamental nature of the data. When the forensic expert ran the final simulation reconstruction, the jury watched the moment Ellie was forced out of the parking lot. the man's figure standing close to her, and then the truck's route leaving the area. The alignment between the DNA evidence, physical items, camera images, and timeline made the courtroom tense. No one stood to speak. No one left their seat. After both sides concluded their presentations, the jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed in silence. No one knew what they were weighing. Only that every piece of forensic evidence, every witness statement, every movement in the video had been placed on the table for discussion. When they returned to the courtroom, every face was solemn. The foreman stood, looked directly at the judge, and read the verdict that all 12 members had unanimously reached after many hours of deliberation. When the jury returned to the courtroom with uniform solemnity in their eyes, the atmosphere in the room became so still that only the faint hum of the ventilation fan broke the silence as the sole sound. The foreman stood up, holding a twice-folded sheet of paper, and read the verdict in a clear, unwavering voice. The jury unanimously found Rudd guilty on all 3 charges. Those words landed heavily in the room, causing Ellie's family to bow their heads, some bursting into tears, while Rudd kept his darkened gaze fixed forward, showing no surprise but rigid with tension, as though he had already known the outcome could not be otherwise. The judge instructed the prosecution to stand and confirm the charges once more to ensure no error in the record. The prosecutor read each count clearly. Homicide classified as a Class A felony, kidnapping under Tennessee Code, and evidence tampering. When the judge asked the jury whether their verdict was based on all the forensic data, testimony, and evidence presented at trial, all 12 members answered yes in unison. At that moment, the formal verdict was complete. The judge moved to sentencing, speaking in an even, firm tone, and reading each sentencing range according to the guidelines. For the homicide charge, the maximum range was applied due to the severity of the conduct, the case's 28-year duration, and the established motive of concealing personal wrongdoing. The court therefore sentenced Rudd to 55 years in prison. For the kidnapping charge, the judge imposed 20 years, because the act of forcing the victim to leave her vehicle and transporting her to a restricted area was sufficient to constitute the full scope of the offense. The evidence tampering charge received an 8-year sentence, based on Rudd's interference with the inspection report, the handwritten alterations, and his slip-of-the-tongue statements intended to conceal the document changes. When aggregating the sentences, the judge chose consecutive terms without applying any reduction or leniency, resulting in a total sentence of 83 years in prison with no possibility of parole. The courtroom fell silent upon hearing that number. No one objected, and no one appeared surprised, as the gravity of the case had been fully laid bare throughout the trial. The judge explained the reasons for the severe penalty: the nearly 3-decade-long concealment, the calculated chain of actions from the outset to avoid professional consequences, the deliberate falsification of the report, and the inherent danger in coercing the victim. The judge emphasized that the forensic evidence had connected the entire sequence of events, leaving no reasonable gap that could create legitimate doubt. Rudd remained silent, his hands gripping the chair arms so tightly that his knuckles turned white, but he offered no rebuttal to any detail during the sentencing. His attorney requested that an objection be noted for the record but presented no additional argument that was accepted, as all evidence had been fully considered during the trial. Ellie's family was asked to stand as the judge read the portion of the conclusion addressed specifically to the victim. The judge confirmed that, based on the forensic reconstruction, timeline data, DNA evidence, evidence locations, and all simulation analyses, the court recognized that Ellie Carter had been murdered on the night she disappeared in 1997. Those words caused Ellie's mother to raise a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, while her father, standing beside her, gripped her hand so hard it visibly trembled. What pained them was not only the confirmation of the loss but the fact that, after 28 years of waiting, they finally received an official conclusion when every fragile hope that Ellie might still be alive had ended. The prosecutor bowed his head toward the family and said that every effort throughout the investigation had been aimed at bringing them the truth. In that moment, the judge ordered the record to reflect that the Ellie Carter case was now legally closed, the evidence was to be retained for archival storage per regulation, and all trial documents were sealed. Rudd was escorted out of the courtroom through the side door, still in handcuffs, eyes fixed on the floor, not speaking a word to anyone. Two officers led him down the long hallway toward the holding area, their footsteps ringing steadily, in contrast to the emotional turmoil still echoing in the courtroom. Some spectators stood to watch him leave, including former workers from Franklin Quarry, who had once worked near Rudd, and now witnessed the truth laid bare. The prosecutor remained to speak with Ellie's family, handing them a copy of the sentencing decision, and noting that the entire forensic file would be made available so they could review any information they wished. Ellie's father nodded, offering thanks in a voice that was almost choked, because this was the first time in 28 years they had heard an undeniable confirmation from the court that their daughter had been murdered. The pain did not lessen, but the agonizing uncertainty, the torment of not knowing what had happened, was replaced by a truth proven through clear scientific structure. Behind them, the jury filed out of the room, some still wearing thoughtful expressions, because they had just participated in one of the trials that relied almost entirely on forensic evidence, where no body was recovered, yet every layer of data led them to the same conclusion. As the courtroom gradually emptied, the 83-year no-parole sentence imposed on Rudd began to be entered into the Tennessee state judicial system. This was a sentence issued based on the aggravating factors of the conduct, including motive, extent of concealment, and impact on the victim. The case was officially closed with all data certified. Ellie's family walked out of the courthouse in a state mixed with grief and relief that the truth had finally been spoken. Though they could not bring Ellie back, they at least knew that justice had been served. The Ellie Carter case, after 28 years of silence and a frozen file, was declared closed by the Tennessee legal system, with the final sentence handed down to the person responsible for her death. When the criminal sentence was pronounced, and the entire case file was transferred to the Nashville Police Department's Central Archive System, the investigative agency held an official press conference to announce the full process of solving a case that had stretched over more than 2 decades. At the briefing, a department representative walked through each investigative step that had been carried out, highlighting the collaboration among the forensic units, the Violent Crimes Investigation Team, and the Evidence Storage Division. On the large screen behind the press table, successive forensic comparison charts were displayed. DNA on the steering wheel of Ellie's car, the plastic fragment found near the scene, fibers caught in the rear door channel, the delivery ticket stained with red soil, along with the simulated timeline matching Rudd's presence at each time marker. The investigator leading the press conference made it clear that the case could not be solved in 1997 because forensic technology at that time lacked the capability to separate mixed DNA samples and could not restore security camera footage, and the fact that an evidence box had been misfiled for many years created an information gap that forced the file into frozen status. When next-generation technology made it possible to reanalyze samples previously considered unusable, they were able to reconstruct a picture that had once been almost entirely blank. The final forensic report from the Tennessee Office of the Medical Examiner was presented at the press conference, confirming that based on the complete layered body of physical evidence, simulations, and contact marks, Ellie Carter had died on the night she disappeared in 1997. The report offered no hypotheses. It used the scientific indicators themselves to prove that no other scenario fit the data structure better than death occurring within the time frame captured by the camera recording the final movements of the suspect truck. The unknown male DNA adhering to the driver's position, the displacement marks on the driver's seat, inconsistent with the victim's height, fibers shed from a technician uniform caught on the car door, and evidence recovered at Franklin Quarry were all incorporated into the report as independent layers, each one pointing to violent interference in the victim's journey. When the final forensic report was released, many specialists present acknowledged that this was one of the first cases in Tennessee where scientific data completely replaced the role of traditional evidence, such as a body or direct eyewitness testimony. As a result, the case was incorporated into teaching materials at the state's Forensic Academy as a case study illustrating the ability to solve crimes through layered evidence structures, including microscopic data, motion simulation, and genealogical DNA correlation analysis. In its portion of the announcement, the Nashville Police Department presented a proposal to reform evidence storage procedures. The head of the storage division reminded everyone that the evidence box misfiled in 2001 was the reason the case was delayed for many years, and the entire system has now been required to update with automatic retrieval coding, internal GPS tracking for the location of every box, and mandatory annual inventory checks. A new procedure flowchart was displayed, illustrating the path of evidence from the scene to the analysis lab, standard sealing and packaging methods, and re-verification protocols in the event a file is reopened. This proposal received approval from representatives of the prosecutor's office, with the goal of minimizing the possibility of future misplacement. When the press conference reached the question and answer portion, a reporter asked the investigator whether the case could have been solved earlier if the evidence had not been misfiled. The investigator answered briefly that 1997 forensics could not perform the DNA separations and simulations possible today, so even if the evidence box had been in the correct location, the data inside still could not have been fully exploited at that time. The development of new technology was the factor that connected the once disparate indicators and reconstructed the truth. The Nashville Police Department representative concluded the briefing with a sentence displayed on the large screen behind them. "The truth does not disappear. It only waits to be found." This is a phrase that commonly appears in internal forensic reports, and on this occasion it was used as the professional conclusion for a case whose entire resolution rested on science rather than speculation. The Ellie Carter file was officially closed with the status "solved by conviction," clearly recording the effective date of the sentence and the full list of forensic evidence used. When the file was entered into the Central Archive system, the thousands of pages case binder received a new identification code, marking the end of a 8-year investigation and confirming that the case no longer remained among Nashville's unsolved files. The story of Ellie Carter and the 8-year journey to solve her case reflects a familiar reality in American life. Many communities still rely on the belief that the justice system will function effectively, yet in practice, justice is sometimes delayed because of technology, procedures, and inconsistencies in management. The fact that a single evidence box was misfiled from 2001 and later became the key to reassembling the entire evidentiary structure shows that meticulous care in even the smallest procedures can be the dividing line between a case labeled unsolvable and one resolved through science. For the American public, where trust in the judicial system is a cornerstone of society, this story serves as a reminder that every system, even the most trusted ones, still depends on people and processes. The ability of next-generation forensics to separate mixed DNA, restore 1997 camera footage, trace soil origins from Franklin Quarry, and correlate timelines to prove Ellie was coerced demonstrates that science is not merely a tool, but the foundation that protects truth when memory, statements, and eyewitnesses have faded. An important lesson for today's American community is the critical importance of data storage, evidence preservation, and continuous technology updates across law enforcement agencies. If evidence had been better managed, Ellie's family might have received answers much sooner, and the pain would not have stretched across nearly 3 decades. At the same time, the story is also a reminder to every individual about the importance of respecting safety procedures, reporting violations, and not remaining silent in the face of dangerous behavior. James Rudd concealed a small technical error, and that very chain of choices to evade responsibility escalated into a fatal crime. In a society that values accountability as highly as the United States does, Ellie's story reminds us that the truth may be temporarily obscured, but it always exists, and every person has a role in protecting it. If you want to keep following stories reconstructed through modern forensic methods like the Ellie Carter case, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next journey to uncover more truths.